April 17, 1945. Task Force 58 Operating Area. 90 nautical miles east of Okinawa. F6F-5 Hellcats from USS Yorktown orbit at 25,000 feet above scattered cumulus clouds. Their Pratt and Whitney are 2800 double Wasp engines breathing thin air through two-stage superchargers. Below them at 15,000 feet, F4U-1D Corsairs from USS Hornet patrol in loose formations, their bent wing silhouettes dark against the morning sun. The mechanism is revolutionary. Commander John Thach's Big Blue Blanket defense system creates killing zones at multiple altitudes, forcing incoming kamikaze formations to run a gauntlet of American fighters before reaching the fleet. The stakes are absolute. If 40 incoming Japanese aircraft from Kyushu break through this layered defense, they could cripple or sink multiple carriers in coordinated suicide attacks that could alter the strategic balance of Operation Iceberg. Lieutenant Commander Yoshikazu Nagahama banked his Mitsubishi A6M50 in a gentle turn 120 miles northwest of the American fleet, leading a formation of 18 fighter aircraft escorting 22 Yokosuka D4 wide duty dive bombers loaded with 1,100-pound bombs for kamikaze missions. At 8,000 feet altitude, the Japanese formation represented a sophisticated coordinated attack against American carrier forces during the Okinawa campaign. Nagahama had been briefed on American defensive tactics by intelligence officers who analyzed wreckage from previous kamikaze missions, but their assessment suggested that enemy fighters operated in single-layer combat air patrols at altitudes below 20,000 feet. The tactical plan was elegantly simple. Make a low-level approach to limit radar detection, then climb near the target area and execute a shallow dive attack that would bring the kamikaze aircraft to their targets at maximum speed, while minimizing exposure to anti-aircraft fire. What Japanese intelligence had failed to detect was the change in American defensive doctrine that had been institutionalized for Operation Iceberg. The Big Blue Blanket system positioned F6F Hellcats at extreme altitude, around 25,000 feet and above, where their supercharged engines maintained useful power while Japanese aircraft struggled with reduced performance. Below them, F4U Corsairs patrolled between roughly 12,000 and 18,000 feet, creating a second layer of defense that could intercept any aircraft that penetrated the high-altitude screen. The tactical innovation represented a shift from reactive to proactive defense. Instead of waiting for enemy aircraft to approach the fleet, American fighters would engage them at maximum range and pursue them through multiple engagement zones. Lieutenant Raymond Porter led a four-plane division of F6F-5 Hellcats from USS Yorktown, his aircraft loaded with 2,400 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition and enough fuel for extended combat air patrol. At 25,000 feet, Porter could see nearly 150 miles in every direction, the curvature of the Earth visible at the horizon. Fighter direction officers aboard the carriers had been tracking multiple contacts approaching from the north for the past 20 minutes, their altitudes estimated between 8,000 and 12,000 feet from radar returns, and they vectored Porter's division to intercept. Porter understood that his division represented the outer layer of a defensive system designed to engage enemy aircraft far from the fleet, but the tactical challenge was unprecedented. Intercept a formation of 40 aircraft with just 4 fighters while maintaining altitude advantage and preventing enemy escape. The F6F-5 Hellcat had been optimized for high-altitude combat operations. Its Pratt and Whitney R-2800-10W engine produced around 2,000 horsepower at sea level and retained strong power at 25,000 feet thanks to its two-stage supercharger. This engineering advantage allowed Hellcats to operate effectively at altitudes where Japanese aircraft suffered dramatic performance degradation. The A6M50's Nakajima Sakare engine delivered much less power at 25,000 feet, reducing the aircraft's climb rate and limiting maximum speed. The performance differential created tactical opportunities that American pilots were trained to exploit through energy management and coordinated attacks. Commander Nagahama first detected American aircraft at 1,047 hours when his formation was still 60 miles from the target area. For single-engine fighters appeared as small dots at extreme altitude, too high to be immediately threatening but positioned to observe Japanese movements and direct other defensive forces. Standard Japanese tactical doctrine called for ignoring distant enemy aircraft until they posed immediate threats, but Nagahama recognized that these high-altitude contacts represented something new in American defensive tactics. His formation was flying at 10,000 feet, climbing slowly to conserve fuel for the attack run, But the American aircraft were clearly operating above 20,000 feet where Japanese fighters could not effectively engage them. The tactical problem facing Japanese forces was becoming apparent. American fighters operating at extreme altitude could observe their approach while remaining difficult to counter. The A6M50 could theoretically reach well over 30,000 feet, but at altitudes above 20,000 feet its performance degraded rapidly due to the limitations of its single-stage supercharger. Combat effectiveness at 25,000 feet was minimal, with reduced engine power limiting maneuverability and climb rate while increasing fuel consumption to unsustainable levels. Japanese pilots attempting to engage high-altitude American fighters would exhaust their fuel supplies before reaching effective combat range, leaving their bombers unescorted and vulnerable to attack. Lieutenant Porter initiated his attack at 1,049 hours, rolling his Hellcat into a steep dive that would bring him from 25,000 feet to the altitude of the Japanese formation in approximately 90 seconds. His wingman, Ensign Robert Walsh, followed at a distance of 500 yards, while the second section maintained altitude to provide top cover and prevent Japanese aircraft from climbing to escape. The diving attack technique had been refined through months of combat experience. Approach from above and behind the enemy formation, use speed advantage to close range rapidly, fire a concentrated burst into the most vulnerable targets, then zoom climb back to altitude before enemy fighters could respond. The tactic required precise timing and coordination, but it allowed small numbers of American fighters to engage much larger enemy formations. The physics of the diving attack favored the Hellcat's superior power-to-weight ratio and structural strength. Diving from 25,000 feet, Porter's aircraft accelerated to more than 450 miles per hour while maintaining full control authority and structural integrity. The F6F-5's robust construction included armor protection around the cockpit and engine, allowing it to absorb defensive fire while maintaining combat effectiveness. In contrast, the lightly built Zero suffered control problems at high speeds, with wing flutter and reduced aileron effectiveness limiting the pilot's ability to evade attacks or return accurate fire. The structural advantages enabled American pilots to press attacks home at close range while accepting defensive fire that would have been catastrophic to less robust aircraft. Porter's first firing pass devastated the left section of the Japanese formation. 650 caliber machine guns firing armor-piercing incendiary ammunition at 300 yards range destroyed 2D-4Y Judy bombers in the first 3-second burst, their fuel tanks exploding in orange fireballs that showered debris across the formation. Porter's zoom climb carried him back to 20,000 feet before Japanese fighters could maneuver to intercept, but Ensign Walsh was already beginning his attack run against the formation's right flank. The coordinated attacks created chaos within the Japanese formation as pilots attempted to evade diving American fighters while maintaining formation integrity for the bombing mission. The tactical effectiveness of the high-altitude attack was immediately apparent to Commander Nagahama. 2 bombers had been destroyed in the first 30 seconds of combat while American fighters remained beyond effective range of Japanese defensive fire. The escort Zeros attempting to climb toward the American fighters were making minimal progress against the performance limitations imposed by altitude, their reduced power and maneuverability making them ineffective interceptors. Nagahama faced a tactical dilemma: continue toward the target while accepting continued losses to high-altitude attacks, or attempt to climb and engage the American fighters while sacrificing the bombing mission's time-critical nature. The second layer of American defense engaged at 1,052 hours as the Japanese formation, now reduced to 35 aircraft, descended toward their target altitude of 5,000 feet. A division of F4U-1D Corsairs from VF-84 aboard USS Bunker Hill, positioned at 15,000 feet, moved to intercept any aircraft that penetrated the high-altitude defense. The Corsairs had been vectored into position by fighter direction officers monitoring the engagement from the carriers, creating a coordinated defense that forced Japanese aircraft to fight through multiple layers of opposition. The division leader's tactical challenge was different from the high-altitude intercept. Engage a damaged but still dangerous formation while preventing individual aircraft from breaking through to attack the fleet. The F4U-1D Corsair represented the pinnacle of American single-engine fighter development then in wide service, with a maximum speed over 400 miles per hour and a strong climb rate at sea level. Its 2,000 horsepower R-2800 engine provided exceptional performance at medium altitudes, while structural strength and heavy armament made it an ideal bomber-destroyer. Each Corsair carried 650 caliber machine guns with about 2,400 rounds of ammunition, sufficient for sustained combat operations against multiple targets. The aircraft's distinctive bent-wing design reduced landing gear length while accommodating a massive 13-foot propeller that maximized engine efficiency across operating altitudes. Commander Nagahama watched American fighters approaching from multiple vectors as his formation struggled to maintain cohesion under continuous attack. The high-altitude Hellcats had destroyed 4 bombers and damaged 3 others, forcing him to jettison his original tactical plan in favor of immediate survival. The approaching Corsairs represented a new threat operating at the same altitude as his formation, eliminating the altitude disadvantage that had protected previous American interceptors. With his escort Zeros scattered by climbing attempts to engage the Hellcats, Nagahama faced the prospect of defending his remaining bombers against fresh fighters with superior performance and armament. The Corsair Division's attack demonstrated the tactical coordination that made the Big Blue Blanket system devastatingly effective. The 4 Corsairs approached the Japanese formation from different bearings, forcing defensive maneuvers that broke formation integrity while exposing individual aircraft to concentrated fire. The first Corsair destroyed a Zero that attempted to intercept the attack, its pilot's head-on pass resulting in a convergence of 50 caliber fire that shattered the enemy aircraft's engine and cockpit. The second Corsair eliminated 2 D4Y bombers with a single firing pass, the heavy 50 caliber bullets igniting fuel vapors that consumed both aircraft in seconds. By 10:55 hours, the Japanese formation had been reduced to 28 aircraft, with most survivors showing battle damage from previous encounters. The psychological impact on surviving Japanese pilots was becoming evident as formation discipline deteriorated under sustained pressure. Kamikaze pilots trained to accept certain death in exchange for successful target impact were unprepared for prolonged combat against superior enemy fighters. The mission briefing had emphasized rapid transit to the target area with minimal exposure to enemy defenses, but the reality of fighting through multiple layers of opposition created stress that exceeded pilot training parameters. Several D4Y pilots began individual attacks without coordination, abandoning the formation in attempts to reach targets before additional American fighters could intercept them. Ensign Hiroshi Yamamoto, piloting a D4Y Judy loaded with a 1,100-pound bomb, broke from the main formation at 1,056 hours in an attempt to reach the American fleet through a gap between defending fighter sections. His aircraft had suffered wing damage from 50 caliber hits during the Corsair attack, reducing maximum speed to 280 miles per hour while creating flight control problems that required constant pilot input. Yamamoto understood that his chances of survival were negligible, but his mission required him to reach an American carrier regardless of casualties sustained en route. The individual breakaway represented the fragmentation of Japanese tactical coordination under pressure from American layered defenses. The third layer of American defense consisted of F6F-5 Hellcats operating at around 8,000 feet directly above the fleet, positioned to intercept any aircraft that penetrated the high and medium altitude screens. A section leader aboard USS Essex led an 8-plane formation responsible for the final defensive line before enemy aircraft reached anti-aircraft gun range. His tactical challenge was unique. Engage individual aircraft and small groups that had survived previous intercepts while they attempted final attack runs against specific targets. The close-range intercepts required precision flying and accurate gunnery to prevent kamikaze impacts that could cripple or sink major fleet units. Ensign Yamamoto's lone D4Y encountered the Essex section at 1,059 hours, 15 miles from the nearest American carrier. The damaged bomber was flying at 3,000 feet, weaving erratically to avoid anti-aircraft fire while searching for a suitable target. The section leader approached from the port quarter, using superior speed to close range while maintaining position outside the bomber's defensive fire arc. The F6F 650 caliber machine guns opened fire at 400 yards, the armor-piercing incendiary rounds walking up the D4Y's fuselage from engine to cockpit. Yamamoto's aircraft disintegrated under the concentrated fire, its bomb detonating harmlessly in the ocean 12 miles from the intended target. The tactical effectiveness of layered fighter defense was demonstrated by the statistical outcome of the engagement. Of 40 Japanese aircraft that began the mission, 31 had been destroyed by American fighters operating at 3 distinct altitude levels. 9 surviving aircraft reached the fleet's outer defensive perimeter, where shipboard anti-aircraft guns destroyed 7 additional planes before they could launch attacks. Only 2 aircraft succeeded in making attack runs against American ships, both missing their targets due to evasive maneuvering and defensive fire. The loss rate was on the order of 95%, representing a tactical disaster that invalidated Japanese assumptions about American defensive capabilities. Commander Nagahama, flying one of 3 surviving A6M50s, attempted to return to Kyushu with insufficient fuel for normal navigation. His aircraft had been damaged by 50 caliber fragments during the Corsair attack, with engine cooling problems limiting maximum power while increasing fuel consumption. The flight home became a desperate exercise in energy management as Nagahama calculated that his remaining fuel supply would allow approximately 90 minutes of flight time over a distance that normally required 110 minutes. The mathematics were unforgiving. Successful return required flying at minimum fuel consumption settings, while accepting reduced speed that made the aircraft vulnerable to additional fighter attacks. The strategic implications of the failed mission extended beyond immediate tactical losses to fundamental questions about Japanese air strategy. The concentration of 40 aircraft in a single attack represented a substantial portion of remaining Japanese air strength on Kyushu, with pilot losses that could not be replaced through existing training programs. More critically, the demonstrated effectiveness of American layered defense suggested that future kamikaze missions would face similar loss rates regardless of tactical modifications. Japanese planners had hoped that concentrated suicide attacks could achieve decisive success rates, but the Big Blue Blanket system was reducing successful attacks to a tiny fraction of sorties launched. Army air staff at Kyushu airfields such as Kanoya received initial reports of the mission failure at 1,145 hours through fragmented radio transmissions from surviving aircraft. The tactical assessment was unambiguous. American defensive capabilities had evolved beyond Japanese countermeasures, creating engagement conditions that made coordinated kamikaze attacks tactically ineffective. More concerning was evidence that American fighters were operating in layered formations that provided multiple engagement opportunities against the same target, multiplying defensive effectiveness while minimizing American casualties. The tactical innovation represented a fundamental shift in air combat doctrine that Japanese planners had not anticipated. The technological factors underlying American success reflected industrial and engineering advantages that extended beyond individual aircraft performance to include systematic integration of radar, communications, and tactical coordination. Fighter direction officers aboard American carriers could track incoming raids at ranges exceeding 100 miles while vectoring defending fighters to optimal intercept positions. Radar picket stations extended this early warning net far from the main body, giving CAP controllers more time and space to build layered intercepts. This capability allowed defensive coordinators to position fighter formations at different altitudes and ranges, creating the layered defense that had proved so effective against the morning's attack. Japanese forces lacked equivalent radar coverage and fighter direction capabilities, forcing them to rely on visual contact and basic radio communication for tactical coordination. Lieutenant Porter's post-mission debriefing revealed the practical advantages that enabled small numbers of American fighters to engage much larger enemy formations. The Hellcats' altitude performance allowed high patrols that provided early warning and first engagement opportunities, while remaining beyond the reach of most Japanese defensive fire. The aircraft's robust construction enabled pilots to press attacks home at close range without fear of structural failure, while heavy armament guaranteed target destruction with brief firing passes. Most importantly, the coordinated nature of American defensive tactics meant that individual pilots were never required to engage entire enemy formations alone, reducing pilot fatigue while maintaining defensive effectiveness. The Japanese tactical response to layered defense demonstrated the limitations of existing kamikaze doctrine when confronted with systematic American countermeasures. Individual breakaways from formation reduced collective defensive firepower while failing to overcome American numerical and performance advantages at any altitude. Attempts to climb and engage high-altitude American fighters exhausted fuel supplies without achieving tactical objectives, leaving bombers unescorted and vulnerable to subsequent attacks. The fundamental assumption underlying kamikaze tactics, that spiritual determination could overcome material disadvantages, was invalidated by American defensive systems that exploited technological superiority through coordinated application of superior resources. The psychological impact on surviving Japanese pilots created additional challenges for future mission planning. Pilots who returned from encounters with the Big Blue Blanket system reported systematic destruction of kamikaze formations by American fighters operating with apparent impunity at multiple altitudes. These reports undermine the morale and confidence of pilots assigned to subsequent missions, creating reluctance to engage American defensive forces even when tactical situations might have offered limited opportunities for success. The erosion of pilot confidence represented a strategic problem that extended beyond immediate tactical considerations to the broader sustainability of kamikaze operations. Admiral Matomagaki, commanding the 5th Air Fleet from his headquarters on Kyushu, reviewed mission reports from April 17 with growing concern about the implications for Japanese air strategy. The loss of 38 aircraft in a single mission represented a significant fraction of remaining Japanese air strength in southern Japan, with pilot casualties that could not be replaced through existing training pipelines. More significantly, the demonstrated effectiveness of American layered defense suggested that future kamikaze missions would face similar loss rates regardless of modifications to aircraft, tactics, or timing. The strategic arithmetic underlying special attack operations now appeared impossible to balance in Japan's favor. The technical analysis of American fighter tactics revealed systematic advantages that extended beyond individual aircraft performance to include operational factors that Japanese forces could not duplicate. American pilots operated from large aircraft carriers with extensive repair facilities, allowing damaged aircraft to be returned to service quickly. Fuel supplies were ample, enabling combat air patrols that maintained coverage throughout daylight hours while providing reserves for extended engagements. Pilot training emphasized formation flying and coordinated attacks that maximized the effectiveness of superior aircraft while minimizing individual pilot exposure to defensive fire. The logistical foundation supporting American fighter operations represented industrial capabilities that Japanese planners had consistently underestimated. Task Force 58 operated on the order of 1,000 carrier-based aircraft during the Okinawa campaign, with replacement aircraft and pilots available to sustain combat operations. Ammunition supplies included millions of rounds of .50 caliber ammunition suitable for air-to-air combat, with armor-piercing incendiary rounds that were devastating against lightly built Japanese aircraft. Fuel quality and availability allowed American engines to operate at combat power settings when required throughout extended missions, providing performance advantages that could not be overcome through tactical innovations. Commander Nagahama's successful return to Kyushu at 1,247 hours provided first-hand intelligence about American defensive capabilities that confirmed the worst fears of Japanese tactical planners. His detailed debriefing described systematic destruction of kamikaze formations by American fighters operating in coordinated layers, with high-altitude aircraft providing early warning and initial engagement, while lower-altitude forces intercepted survivors attempting to reach targets. The tactical coordination was unprecedented in Nagahama's experience, suggesting that American defensive doctrine had evolved to address specifically the kamikaze threat through integrated application of superior technology and training. The strategic implications extended beyond immediate tactical concerns to fundamental questions about Japanese ability to contest American air superiority over home waters. If kamikaze missions could not achieve acceptable success rates against American carrier forces, Japan lacked effective means for engaging enemy fleet units that supported amphibious operations. The failure of special attack operations would leave Japanese ground forces without air support while American carriers provided continuous close air support for advancing infantry. The tactical defeat represented a strategic crisis that called into question Japanese ability to defend the home islands against anticipated invasion. The mechanical reliability demonstrated by American fighters during extended combat operations revealed another dimension of technological superiority that Japanese forces could not match. F6F Hellcats and F4U Corsairs sustained operations for hours without significant mechanical failures. There are 2,800 engines delivering dependable power through repeated engagements. Japanese aircraft suffered increasing mechanical problems during extended operations, with engine failures and control malfunctions that forced pilots to abort missions or accept degraded performance during critical phases of combat. The reliability differential compounded performance disadvantages while reducing Japanese sortie rates to levels that could not sustain effective operations. The Corsair Division leader's analysis of the engagement emphasized the tactical flexibility provided by layered defensive systems that could be adjusted to meet different types of threats. High-altitude Hellcats provided early warning and first intercept capabilities against formations approaching at any altitude, while medium-altitude Corsairs engaged aircraft that attempted to penetrate the outer defensive layer. Low-altitude Defenders provided final intercept opportunities against individual aircraft that survived previous encounters. The system's effectiveness stemmed from its ability to engage the same targets multiple times while forcing them to fight through defensive layers that imposed cumulative attrition rates that were devastating to the attacker. The training and experience advantages of American pilots represented factors that Japanese planners had consistently underestimated in their assessment of relative combat capabilities. American fighter pilots typically logged hundreds of hours of flight training before entering combat, including extensive instruction in gunnery, formation flying, and tactical coordination. Combat veterans rotated home to train new pilots, ensuring that accumulated experience was transmitted to replacement personnel. This systematic approach to pilot development created a combat force with uniform capabilities and tactical understanding that enabled complex operations like layered defensive systems. Japanese pilot training had been dramatically reduced due to fuel shortages and aircraft unavailability, with some kamikaze pilots receiving only a few dozen hours of flight instruction before assignment to combat units. The abbreviated training focused on basic flying skills and navigation, with minimal instruction in combat maneuvering or defensive tactics. Pilots assigned to escort duties lacked the training and experience necessary to engage American fighters effectively, particularly in the complex three-dimensional environment created by layered defensive systems. The training differential created capability gaps that could not be overcome through courage or determination alone. The industrial capacity supporting American air operations dwarfed Japanese production capabilities by margins that made sustained combat operations mathematically impossible for Japanese forces. American aircraft factories and training pipelines delivered replacement aircraft and aviators in large monthly numbers, allowing combat units to sustain operations while expanding total force size. These production capabilities enabled the United States to sustain combat operations indefinitely while accepting casualty rates that would have been catastrophic for Japanese forces with limited replacement capacity. The tactical lessons learned from the April 17 engagement were rapidly incorporated into American defensive doctrine through systematic analysis and dissemination to all carrier fighter squadrons. The effectiveness of layered defense at multiple altitudes was confirmed through statistical analysis of engagement outcomes, with specific altitude assignments and coordination procedures refined based on pilot debriefings and observed results. Fighter direction procedures were standardized to ensure consistent application of layered defensive tactics, while aircraft positioning was optimized to maximize coverage while maintaining fuel efficiency. The systematic approach to tactical development enabled continuous improvement in defensive effectiveness. Japanese tactical planners attempting to develop countermeasures for layered defensive systems faced fundamental limitations that could not be overcome through doctrinal modifications. The performance disadvantages of Japanese aircraft at high altitude made engagement of American high-altitude fighters tactically impractical, while limited fuel supplies prevented extended combat operations that might have exhausted American defensive resources. Communication and radar limitations prevented coordination of complex tactical maneuvers that might have overwhelmed individual defensive layers. Most critically, aircraft and pilot shortages made large-scale attacks increasingly difficult to organize and execute. The psychological impact of systematic defeat in air combat was beginning to affect Japanese pilot morale and effectiveness in ways that extended beyond immediate tactical considerations. Pilots briefed on previous mission outcomes understood that survival rates for kamikaze missions were approaching zero, creating reluctance to volunteer for special attack operations that had previously attracted willing participants. Combat pilots assigned to escort duties reported increasing stress and fatigue as they struggled with the knowledge that their aircraft and training were inadequate for engaging American defensive forces. The erosion of pilot confidence represented a strategic problem that threatened the sustainability of Japanese air operations. Subsequent assessments by Japanese air staff concluded that special attack operations could no longer achieve tactical objectives that justified their continued execution. The combination of American layered defensive systems, superior aircraft performance, and systematic pilot training advantages had created engagement conditions where Japanese success rates fell below the threshold necessary for effective military operations. The concentration of remaining Japanese air strength in kamikaze missions was consuming irreplaceable resources while failing to achieve strategic objectives, creating a tactical death spiral that would exhaust Japanese air power without inflicting comparable losses on American forces. The strategic implications of failed kamikaze operations extended to broader questions about Japanese defensive strategy for the anticipated invasion of the home islands. Without effective air power to contest American carrier operations, Japanese ground forces would face continuous close air support during amphibious landings while lacking air cover for their own operations. American fighter supremacy would enable unrestricted reconnaissance and interdiction missions that would isolate Japanese defensive positions while providing intelligence for optimal target selection. The failure to maintain effective air resistance represented a strategic catastrophe that called into question Japanese ability to defend against invasion. The technological trajectory of American fighter development suggested that Japanese tactical problems would continue to worsen as newer aircraft with superior performance entered service. The F6F-5 Hellcat and F4U-1D Corsair represented intermediate steps in American fighter evolution, with advanced models already in testing that promised even greater performance advantages. New American fighters featured improved engines, armament, and electronics that would further expand the capability gap while production rates supported continued expansion of carrier air groups. Japanese aircraft development had essentially ceased due to material shortages and design limitations, creating a technological trajectory that favored American forces in all future engagements. The final assessment of the April 17 engagement confirmed the impact of layered defensive systems on air combat operations in the Pacific theater. American fighters operating at multiple altitudes had transformed traditional concepts of bomber defense from reactive interception to proactive engagement that began at maximum range and continued through multiple defensive zones. The tactical innovation represented a systematic application of technological and training advantages that produced very high defensive effectiveness while maintaining acceptable American casualty levels. The success of the Big Blue Blanket system validated the strategic decision to prioritize fighter production and pilot training while providing tactical doctrine that could be applied against all forms of Japanese air attack. The broader implications of American defensive success extended beyond immediate tactical victories to fundamental changes in the strategic balance of air power in the Pacific. Japanese kamikaze operations, conceived as the ultimate expression of spiritual determination over material disadvantage, had been systematically blunted by American technological superiority and tactical innovation. The failure of special attack operations eliminated Japanese ability to contest American carrier operations while exposing the limitations of doctrine based on spiritual factors rather than technological capabilities. The tactical revolution represented by layered fighter defense marked the end of effective Japanese air resistance and the beginning of American air supremacy over the Japanese home islands. For individual American pilots, the success of layered defensive tactics validated months of training and tactical development, while providing confidence for future operations against Japanese air power. The systematic destruction of enemy formations by coordinated fighter attacks demonstrated the effectiveness of American training doctrine and equipment while minimizing pilot casualties through superior tactics and technology. The achievement represented the culmination of American industrial and military development that had transformed tactical disadvantage in 1942 into overwhelming superiority by 1945. The human cost of Japanese tactical failure was measured not only in aircraft and pilot losses but in the broader implications for Japanese defensive strategy and national survival. The inability to contest American air superiority over home waters meant that subsequent American operations could proceed with minimal interference while Japanese ground forces faced increasing isolation and vulnerability. The strategic significance of air power had been demonstrated through systematic defeat of Japanese attempts to challenge American defensive systems, marking the transformation of tactical innovation into strategic advantage that would determine the outcome of the Pacific War. The final analysis of the Big Blue Blanket system revealed its effectiveness stemmed not from revolutionary technology but from systematic application of existing advantages through coordinated tactical doctrine. American fighters, radar systems, and pilot training were individually superior to Japanese equivalents, but their integration into layered defensive systems multiplied these advantages while minimizing Japanese opportunities for tactical response. The innovation represented American ability to analyze tactical problems systematically and develop coordinated solutions that maximized the effectiveness of superior resources. The morning of April 17, 1945, marked a turning point in Pacific air warfare that extended beyond the immediate tactical engagement to fundamental changes in strategic balance. Japanese kamikaze formations approaching American carrier forces faced layered defensive systems that engaged them at maximum range and pursued them through multiple defensive zones until mission completion became impossible. The systematic destruction of attacking aircraft validated American defensive doctrine while undermining Japanese assumptions about spiritual determination overcoming material disadvantage. The tactical evolution represented the final maturation of American air power from defensive resistance to offensive dominance that would characterize subsequent operations in the Pacific theater.